It's just gone on a bit unstable. Is everyone okay to hear me? Is that fine?
Yes. Yep.
We're good? Okay, great. Hopefully it sticks with us. So before I start sharing the screen, I just wanted to, build on something actually that the two previous speakers had shared, which was to broaden our definition of public space from the streets solely. So I work inside an old town hall, a converted town hall in North Melbourne, that is now a very flexible, multidisciplinary art space that artists love to be in once they're there, and I'll get to that later. But I wanted to propose that any civic institution of that kind should be seen as public space and a site that's open for debate and should be held and is held to account by its citizens, or in my council land, ratepayers. And I think that's really important to hold because of my second point about public space, which bounces off something that Mark said, which is that the internet and social media are a form of public space in 2020 space wholly owned by private interests. So a civic town hall, like where I work, or indeed a recreation centre, a pool, a gallery, a museum, any of those spaces that are sort of government driven are really crucial for if we're going to contest ideas, enact any kind of activism. So I wanted to share that because as a curator, and I'm experiencing it on an everyday level, I think it's important to consider what that practice looks like inside the institution. And this goes beyond and within COVID-19. I'm definitely building upon some thoughts that Clotilde Belen from the MCA, who's a curator there, shared as part of, I'm forgetting the symposium, but it was held at MAMA late last year on public space. And I'm really saying that curatorial practice inside an institution does look like facilitation, collaboration, and institutional activism. It means doing the work that I think any responsible contemporary arts organisation should be doing at the moment, which is thinking through ways to disperse power and decision making. Now, a massive institution uses hierarchy to mitigate risk. So to disperse power like that is potentially uncomfortable for a big institution. And I think one of the more important areas of work we're doing at the moment is to find new systems or different methods of cultural governance over our work. And that is absolutely about First Nations people, but it is also about representation that the community expects for artists with a disability, for people of colour. So I guess I wanted to just offer a few of those framing contexts at the beginning of this discussion as a way into a couple of projects that I wanted to talk about. My screen now. So the first is refuge. We've been doing refuge since 2015, and the project imagines a space where the crisis has already occurred and thinks through how we would respond. In the first year, we looked at floods. The second year, we looked at heat. And in 2018, we worked with the Doherty Institute as part of the University of Melbourne to look at pandemics. So, and then in 2019, we looked at displacement. It's an incredibly weird experience when your speculative project becomes absolutely a daily reality. And so a lot of the things that we were engaged with as part of a broader community preparedness project and worked very closely with some of the people in uniform that you can see in this image, our state emergency service, the Red Cross, and also our internal emergency management colleagues at City of Melbourne. A lot of the language and a lot of the thinking that's inside refuge is now very explicit across the world. Things like, in a crisis, it's people at the margins who are already made more vulnerable. Things like when the strength, the pre-existing strength of a community is what will allow a better response when that community is under pressure. And that's why emergency services and why we've worked so closely with them to look at community preparedness and the Red Cross's Know Your Neighbour campaigns. And they're very modest, I guess, in their thinking, and also trying really, emergency services more generally is the more, some of the partners we've worked with are trying very hard to move out of what they know isn't going to work for us in the future, which is a control and command approach. So refuge has become a space in which these kinds of discussions can be had across disciplines between artists, and we've had the same core group of artists involved with some additional people coming in along the way since 2015. And so those conversations can be had between artists, between emergency services, between scientists. And there was a lot of playing in the dark, which was incredibly useful. What has been most fascinating about having done that work with those collaborators, and they're probably there's probably 80 to 100 people that have been involved in Refuge since 2015 as what I would consider core collaborators, is when we put together a recent series that you can go back and have a look at. It's, as was mentioned, the Refuge Live Talk series. What's become really evident is that the artists involved in this work are uniquely prepared for living through and adapting to crisis like COVID-19. So it says to me that speculative and imaginative work actually is resilience building and incredibly useful to sort of prepare people for what happens. We were actually meant to do our main lab that brings together 80 people across the disciplines. We were meant to do that on the day that our building got closed. So it was quite curious to me that in that quite crazy environment of immediate flux and change, it was these artists that really were quite centered and less disrupted, I guess, emotionally and mentally than many of the other artists that I'm working with on a day level. The other thing that I wanted to note about Refuge in particular, and you'll see this if you go and have a look at our website and recent talks, is that perhaps the most strongest theme that's emerged over time is the importance of embedding First Nations wisdom as part of community preparedness. And yes, the outcomes of Refuge at times include artistic projects of a range of forms and dinners like this and talks and discussion, I guess events like the arts normally does. But a big part of the project is also speaking in forums where we are not the arts aren't normally seen, and in particular where First Nations people aren't normally seen. So that's been a lot of the work, is just continued presence and explaining the value of creativity in an emergency management context. Everyone's very open to it, but it's about that, I guess, continued advocacy. The second project I wanted to share with you is about to open next week. Sorry,
you're just on 8 minutes.
Oh, wow, okay. All right, very quickly I'll run through the second project, which is something we conceived to explore the digital and the live well before COVID-19 occurred, and all sorts of arts discussions were taking place online. So this will launch on the 22nd of June, head on over. But I think one of the things that I wanted to make a point about was raised by Mark as well, which is the idea of virtual co-presence, and the sense that even when we're well before we were sitting at home in isolation, we were sharing experiences together, but via our phones or other kinds of technologies. And I think that that term virtual co-presence is quite beautiful. The last thing I just wanted to quickly mention is I guess, a more broad note on the nature of theatres as a public space and the lack of the complete commercial unviability of being in a theatre that operates with 50% or 70% capacity because you're trying to keep social distancing. That is one issue that's sort of being played out politically at the moment and in all sorts of other places. But I wanted to talk just as much about when you are trying to expand the kinds of people that are interested in the arts or feel like they're valued or part of or relevant to a conversation for the arts. Most of the time you do that one by one. You do that to invite someone very specific who is a leader within their community into your space, and you try to provide welcome to them. And it is a huge, and for my building in particular, it's a huge imposing colonial town hall. So it's really intimidating for certain parts of the community. Providing welcome to people from all who might be intimidated by that space is a crucial part of what we do, and it's made a lot more challenging by the kinds of restrictions that we'll see when really, to be safe, we should be meeting in this way rather than inviting people into our building all the time. So, and likewise, the way we share food, or all the different parts of how we make people feel at home in our house are really challenged. So, and for that reason, I guess that's I guess to circle back why technological tools are going to be required to really be pushed as the potential source of ways that we can think through those kinds of welcoming activities.